gonna give it a couple more minutes for folks to get started. So if you need to grab a beverage, chat. Brooke, what is your favorite coping mechanism this election season?
I've been relying on my big supply of pipe cleaners, which I have rebranded as fidget sticks. Although
Fidget stick.
I did an obsessive amount of vacuuming today, so vacuuming might be my new coping mechanism, which would be greatly beneficial for everyone here in the household if that became my new coping mechanism.
You can do your coping mechanism at my house if you'd like. Please feel free. How about you, Lisa? Karen, you have a favorite coping mechanism for this election? De-stress?
We still have lovely weather here in the Pacific Northwest, and so getting out for a walk with my dog, literally feet on the ground, like seeing what's actually happening with the plants. The trees are starting to turn. It's beautiful. It just sort of reminds me of, just being present with what's happening right now and not getting carried away with too much of the other stuff that takes off in my head.
I love that, especially because making sure that we continue to have spaces like that for us to be able to de-stress and remind us to touch the grass or the prairie if you want to be more biologically diverse than a manicured lawn so that you can get into nature. How about you, Karen?
Well, in addition to going to take a walk outside, I find it's the most important thing is to unplug from my devices and the news and social media because that is just a black hole.
It is indeed. Brooke, should we get started? Yeah? Okay, couple things I wanted to have us do first, just to make sure not all of us spend all day, every day in virtual Zoom spaces. So I wanted to make sure we got to practice with some of the fun features. Two important ones I want you all to be aware of. One is the chat box. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a little icon that says chat box. And I would love for folks to jump into the chat box and say hi and introduce yourselves. Just to practice using that chat box. You can also use that to ask questions. Howdy, Lisa, thank you. So just say a little thank you, Cedric. Hello, hello from Maine, Tammy. Just pop in there and say hi. If you have any challenges with it, just let me know. I am very excited to be here. My primary role is to facilitate or mostly MC these amazing experts that you'll get to hear more from today. So if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to reach out. Hello from New York City. Hello, Sam. The other function I would love for you all to practice with, awesome Audrey from Nevada, is the raise your hand feature. So if you want to just look on the bottom of your Zoom call, you should also be able to see something that allows you to raise your hand. Thank you, Cedric. Anybody else, please try to use that raise your hand function. Okay. Excellent, excellent. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I encourage folks, if you do have a question at any time, feel free to raise your hand. I will flag that for Brooke if she can't see it, or for Lisa and Karen during their sessions. We will be continuing to let folks into the room, but we are going to get started. So I'd love to just see a show of hands. You can either use, if you have your video on, you can use your actual hand. If you want to use the chat box, you can say me. Or you can use that fun raise your hand feature that you can see on the bottom of your Zoom. So I would love for you to raise your hand if you are a childless cat lady. So I am a childless cat lady. Yeah. Tammy, Sarah, Madeline, Jessica, Lisa. Excellent. Excellent. So we got some wonderful, wonderful childless cat ladies here. Raise your hand if you are voting from a swing state. Carrie, I have kitties for you on demand if you need one. Just send me your address. I've got access to lots of kittens. So yes, swing state. Audrey, what state are you swing stating from?
Nevada.
Woo! Go Audrey. How about you, Carol?
Oh.
You're on mute.
Pennsylvania, the two of us.
Woohoo!
Wow.
Pennsylvania. How about you, Cedric? Where are you calling us from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, Georgia. Woo! Okay, so excited to have some swing staters here. Anybody go to any of the Zoom calls like Women for Harris, White Dudes for Harris, Win with Black Women? Did anybody go to any of those Zoom calls? Yes, I did. Brooke did. Carol did. Excellent. Well, good. This call will be a little bit different than those traditional Zoom calls. I was lucky enough to see the Women for Harris, White Women for Harris call at the same time that Brooke was Zoom call. So we were texting back and forth, which is a lot of where the energy and the excitement for this came from. And so this little idea has been germinating since that Zoom call. And I'm so excited to be here to support Brooke and Lisa and Karen as they help us think about getting the vote out for the planet and why that is just so incredibly important. And so I'm going to turn it over here to Brooke. She's going to give us a bit of background. Then we're going to start learning a little bit from Lisa and from Karen on how we get comfortable with the conversation about voting for the planet. And then you get to see the awesomeness that is Brooke's brain on paper in the playbook for Vote for the Planet. It's true, Brooke, stop laughing. And your parents are here. So I get to be all like, woo, you know, because they get to see how awesome everybody else thinks you are, not just them. And then at the end, we'll talk about what any of our personal commitments are, how we are going to take the things that we learned and use this to transform our democracy and ensure that we are voting for those folks who are going to actually do something about the environmental challenges that we are all facing, that we can all see, sadly, in real time after Hurricane Helene. So, Brooke, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amiel, and thank you everyone so much for being here. And I know we have some folks here too. Patty just messaged me in the chat box who are actually not based in the US and won't be voting in these elections. And that's totally okay too. I think the playbook and a lot of what we're talking about here will have a shelf life and legs beyond whatever transpires between now and November 5th. And I think we'll probably be tweaking it a bit so that it can be used in other contexts, other forms of US elections, and even you can take it and apply it in your own country, because a lot of the planet is on the ballot pretty much everywhere. These are global issues. Rarely are they just US American issues. But I know I have not met everyone who is here. My name is Brooke Tully, and I specialize in motivating action and change for the planet. So behavioral science mixed with communication strategies. And lately, I've gotten a little fired up about politics. And if you're here today, it's probably because you've gotten a little fired up about politics as well. I've also gotten a bit more vocal about politics. And I know my shirt's backwards for y'all, but it says I am a voter. And getting more vocal about politics is honestly kind of new for me. And it did sort of start about 2 months ago, as Amiel said, when she and I realized we were both on this call together. White Women Answer the Call. It was organized by two amazing women, Shannon Watts and Erin Gallagher, who have been organizing on a number of different issues even prior to this, although that call was my first introduction to them. They built upon a momentum put together by Joteka Edie, who within hours after President Biden nominated VP Harris to be the next president, within hours, they brought together 44,000 women on a webinar to really start the movement that we are a part of today. And, you know, Amiel mentioned some of it, childless cat ladies. There's been Geeks and Nerds for Harris, Out for Harris. There's comedians for Harris. I mean, the list goes on and on. The number of interest and identity-based groups coming together have just been, you know, really just exciting to see and be a part of, and as much as we can be a part of it. So I mention all that to know that even though we are gathered here today, there's 20 some odd of us here in the room, we are part of something happening that's much bigger than us. And it's really, really exciting to be part of a movement like this. I think that's probably why so many of you are here today as well, because this is exciting. But even after I was feeling kind of inspired and empowered by these calls, I've also been feeling like there's been something missing for me, something I've been struggling with. And my first struggle is that these calls weren't necessarily talking about the planet. They focused on many serious issues that we 1000% need to be supporting and voting on. Reproductive rights and freedoms, just our democracy in totality, gun safety, and the list goes on and on for reasons why we need to be voting in this year's election. But the planet is on the ballot this year too. We need climate adaptations and climate mitigation and climate resilience measures to prepare for and recover from storms that we are seeing right now happen in the US. And any folks here that were affected by that, I'm glad you're here. I appreciate that you're here. And man, I mean, what a storm coming through. We need policymakers that are going to be willing to protect and take care of the people who are increasingly impacted by these kinds of severe storms and floods and wildfires and air pollution and rising heat conditions. This list goes on and on too. We need to keep advancing our clean energy initiatives. We need to work on water conservation, pollution solutions. I don't know if anybody's using pollution solutions, but I'm now going to coin that. So that's trademarked as of now in this call. We need a hell of a lot more sustainable agriculture support and funding. We need continued and not decreased protections for endangered species. And we need to protect our National Park Service employees who won't let their park land get bulldozed over by their local politicians. And we need to make sure that we can still get weather alerts from NOAA to be prepared for the storms that are coming our way. So I'm making the case here. I don't really need to make the case to this audience. You're all here for the same reason. We work hard on protecting the planet. But we also know that this work is tiring, it's draining. It's actually a really hard topic to work on. And most of us don't just work on it. We kind of like live and breathe it. These are our passions. And in many of our work too, the odds are kind of working against us. We need policymakers at every level, federal, state, local, who support the work we're doing financially, morally, ethically, and through regulation. Increasingly, we're going to need regulation on our side. What we don't need is to be pushing a bigger boulder up a steeper hill with someone pushing it against us the entire way. So I'm on these calls, I'm feeling jazzed about politics. I haven't necessarily been hearing the planet be a piece of it. And I'm looking to make that intersection. Now, I do want to give credit. There's been a number of groups that have come out, Biodiversity Leaders for Harris, Climate Change Makers, League of Conservation Voters that have started to do webinars since this. So I'm so excited to see this come into the fray a bit more. But I had another struggle, and that was, how do I break my silence? For my entire career, conservation and sustainability organizations have taken a neutral stance on politics. We leave advocacy to the activist groups. And we know who they are, and it's not necessarily a good look for us. So the idea about talking about politics on social media or in person felt really risky to me, felt really uncomfortable. It still does. But I'm doing it anyways. We have to. Silence and neutrality doesn't help anyone. It means the loudest voices get to own the conversation. But when we push past our discomfort and put ourselves out there a bit more, it has positive ripple effects. It opens the door for others to step through. It sends a signal to others that they're not alone. It invites others to join us. It dissolves the taboo. It normalizes the act of voting, the act of talking about voting, and the act of prioritizing the planet in every election. So today's kind of mini workshop webinar is a starting point for all of us to embrace the discomfort, because it's still going to be uncomfortable. But if we can embrace it, then we can open the door for our friends, our colleagues, our family members, our social media followers, our newsletter subscribers, our board members, and everyone else around us to also come in with us. The goal at the end of today is not to leave this webinar and find a diehard MAGA person and try to convince them to vote for the planet. That's not what we're going to ask you to do here. But the goal is to put our voices out there a little bit more so that collectively we can create an even bigger echo with our voices and continue to push this momentum and this movement forward. Not just the planet movement, but this entire movement that we're all a part of. I'm on this journey with you. I am learning along the way. I am making mistakes along the way as well, and that's okay. And I love that all of you are here on this journey and to make new learnings and new mistakes along the way with us. So this is why we've come together today, and this is my personal why for being here. So thank you so much for joining us. And Amiel, I'm curious to hear about your why for being here.
Yeah, as Brooke mentioned, we were on that Zoom call together and just talking about what are the different ways in which our community that we're so connected to, as Brooke said, we live and breathe this stuff in our day to day, but we don't talk about voting. And I feel the same way, right? I'm an ecologist by training. I always felt like being moderately neutral was was my calling so that I could be an objective scientist. But when science is not being respected, when it's not being used to inform policy, when people are actively working against the even value of science in these public spaces, it felt like it was time to start thinking about how to defend the planet, given that if folks are not using the science to form their opinions now, why don't we talk then about what we know, what we care about, and use those voices for good? And I'll tell you, just in having these conversations with Brooke over the last month, I have been practicing my discomfort in just bringing it up, and sometimes in weird places, like my partner owns a bar, and you're not allowed to talk about politics at the bar. There's even a sign behind the bar that says don't talk about politics. But after talking to Brooke, I was at his place the other night, and I was talking to some folks about Helene, and they started talking about how climate change doesn't exist and these extreme weather events are just normal because the climate has already been changing. So I use that as an opportunity to kind of flex that muscle, bringing it up. Although my partner said I might get kicked out next time I do it, I was able to get some good words in edgewise, but no, more importantly, have a real conversation. And politics doesn't always have to be about I'm right, you're wrong. It's about choosing how we deeply value the conversation, understand the other person's values, and seek to understand and help them better understand the connection between who we vote for and the benefits that that brings for things that I care most deeply about. So that's my why. I'd also love to hear from Lisa and Karen, if you'd be willing to share your whys. Lisa, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I echo a lot of what you all are saying, and I'm sort of drawn into these spaces where there's something that we should be talking about, but we aren't. And Karen and I started, along with a partner, our work on Yes and Nature and climate conversations because particularly as a volunteer at my local zoo, my zoo is not afraid to talk about politics, especially if there's a local ballot measure that they want people to vote for. So that's wonderful. But what I definitely saw was that we weren't talking about climate. And so getting people comfortable with how do we talk about those things that are uncomfortable, because it matters a lot. Our voice matters. We have a lot of influence on the people around us, and we're kind of complicit if we're silent, right? So finding ways to walk in that space that can be uncomfortable, these things that we're not supposed to talk about it. How can we find productive ways to talk about it and find areas of agreement and where we could actually make positive impact together? Karen?
So, hi everybody. I'm Karen Strong. I'm in upstate New York, and I've been working in conservation for 25 years. I want to plus one everything that Brooke, Lisa, and Amiel said. But what I want to add is that I think about who benefits from your silence, right? When this happens, when we don't talk about it, who benefits? There are powers that want you to not talk about things. They don't want you to talk about climate change. They don't want you to talk about politics and voting, so that people aren't having, dialogue and conversation, and maybe can learn something about one another. Yesterday, two people I talked to, including my mom and somebody else in my book club, talked about how they don't want to talk about politics with anybody. One being her daughter, because she is not voting for either Trump nor Harris. She's young, she's in her 20s. And so I thought, maybe I should have invited her to this, right? So we can talk about how we talk about it, because it is hard, and we have to be thoughtful about how we talk about it, right? This is not about just like taking the lid off and saying, okay, now say everything that you're thinking, right? It's like, how do we approach a conversation so that we can actually communicate with somebody else, instead of sharing what you think and then waiting for them to share what they think, or perhaps shut down and walk away, right? So how do we invite actual dialogue? Because that's what's missing. That's the only way we're going to work through our issues, is if we really talk to each other, really listen to each other, really try to understand one another, so that we can maybe find a new way together. So that's why I work with Lisa and our other partner, Bobby, to on Yes and Nature, so that we can do that. We can talk more about conservation and climate change and nature. And I'm super excited to be talking about that around voting as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you saw in the chat box, Brooke suggested if you wanted to share your why in the chat box, we'd welcome that. We'd love to hear you, hear about what your why is, whether or not it is for your family or for some particular aspect of nature that you really love, or you're worried about climate change. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear your why. And in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Brooke and Karen and Lisa to lead our next session.
Yeah, so you want me to jump in? You get Brooke? Okay.
Yeah.
So, when Karen and I were talking about our why, you guys heard a little bit about Yes and Nature and the organization that we formed. Our underlying philosophy is don't convince, connect, right? So what we're going to be working on in this next segment is bringing out some tools and practicing how we get more comfortable with that conversation. How can we listen with curiosity and forego judgment, right? And what are some tips and tricks for being able to do that and actually putting that into practice, so that, as Karen said, we can actually listen, not to be able to respond, but really listening to understand before we even try to advocate or convince anybody about anything. And we've definitely found that as we have worked with these tools, primarily we're doing this in the context of climate change and helping people feel comfortable there. But similarly for voting, it's this magical way of sort of shifting our practice of listening, and being able to asking open-ended questions without leading. So in a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Karen, and she is going to lead us through a demo of an activity. Brooke and I will be playing parts in that, and so you guys can sit back and be part of learning through observing, and then as we debrief, entering that conversation. Karen, Brooke, anything else that you want me to cover before I hand it over to you to take us through it, Karen?
I think we're good. Yeah. So one thing I want to say before we get started is that this is a skill. Like, practicing listening without judgment and with curiosity may feel really, really hard. It's hard for me sometimes. It is a skill that can be developed with practice. So what we're going to show you, what Lisa and Brooke are going to do, is one way to start practicing that. And that you can take this home and practice together if you're together, or with your new friends that you're just meeting, so that you can practice doing it, so that when you're having a higher stakes conversation, right, the stakes are pretty low right now, right here in this room. When you're having a higher stakes conversation, you can feel more comfortable doing these things. So we're going to have a quick conversation. Brooke is going to ask Lisa a question, And then Lisa is going to respond to that question. And Brooke's challenge is going to be asking open-ended questions to continue to try to build connection, to really start moving toward a dialogue. So the question that that Brooke is going to ask Lisa is, why do I need to talk about voting? So every 20 to 30 seconds, I'm going to ring my brand new cowbell from the American Farmland Trust that I can't put in the right place. There we
The
go.
invisible cowbell. I love it.
Invisible
Got it
cowbell.
ahead.
To remind Brooke that what she should do is use some magic words called tell me more about that. So what you're going to do when I ring the bell is say, oh, you said this thing. Can you tell me more about that? And that's all you do. Every 20 or 30 seconds, you're going to pick a thread that she said and ask her to tell you more about that. We'll do that for a couple minutes. And Amiel, if you could just give us like 90 seconds. After 90 seconds, yeah, that would be great.
And Karen, do you want us to be spotlit?
Oh, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Let's do that.
You might know how to do that.
Oh,
Here I am, like asking for the thing.
I don't know. I'm not a Zoom expert here. All right,
Yeah,
I can do
I
it.
did
One of us
me.
can
I
do it,
think
yeah.
add spotlight. All right,
There
I
we
think
go.
I
there
figured
we
it
go.
out.
And I'll be the omniscient narrator. Okay, so cowbell ringer. All right, so Brooke, ask Lisa, why do I need to talk about voting?
Hey, Lisa, I was just on this webinar. It was pretty interesting, but they just kept talking about how I'm supposed to talk about voting. Like, why do I need to talk about voting?
Well, I mean, I know it sounds pretty basic, but I think, I've been noticing, like, even in this very like progressive town where I live, some people like kind of say like, it's not going to make a difference. I don't need to vote. And I think if we don't talk about it, people don't. It's not maybe top of mind, and those kind of ideas get reinforced for them. And probably just by even talking about what you're doing, or demonstrating that it makes a difference for you, people who respect you and who care about your opinion, it'll make them think. So I think I agree with you that it might feel kind of silly or basic. And like, don't we have more important things to do? But it probably makes more of a difference than we imagine. Just getting out, talking about it, letting other people who are in our sphere of influence know that we think voting is important to do and to talk about.
You mentioned that some people, don't want to talk about voting or don't feel like it's important to talk about. Can you tell me more about what you've heard from people in your area?
Yeah, I think, there were definitely some people who maybe from like marginalized communities and didn't, haven't had a history of voting, have felt like their vote really didn't matter.
Yeah. Mm. And Karen, just so you know, I'm not hearing that cowbell at all. I don't know if you are, Lisa.
Cowbell.
Just say it, cowbell.
Cowbell.
Should I keep going or are we switching?
Yeah, just do one more and then we'll switch.
And Lisa, tell me more about why you think people might feel like voting doesn't count or doesn't matter.
Well, I'm on the West Coast, right? And so I definitely, especially when I lived in Alaska, people were like, they're already calling it, like it doesn't matter if I vote because, I'm in, I don't have a lot, I'm not in a very populous state, and it's late in the day, and all the votes that count have been counted.
Wow.
So hold on a sec. I just noticed, Brooke, when what did you just say? Your last question, you said, tell me more about why you think people aren't voting.
Yeah, are saying that it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right. And so that is more of a closed question. You're directing the conversation a little bit more.
Yes,
right?
I do that frequently.
Oh, we all do it. We all do it all the time. And whoever did the spotlight, you could unspotlight while we talk about this a little bit.
Sure, I will try to figure that out.
Oh,
so
we all have the power, don't we?
There
we go.
Great. Yeah, so open-ended questions really are just giving the other person the space to to talk, right? And close-end questions are steering it a lot more, and they can feel they land a little bit differently. So in that vein, let's think about Brooke. How was that listening and inquiry experience for you? Just the process of pulling one thread, asking to tell me more.
It definitely forced me to listen much more carefully, and be present and be attentive. I did feel the pressure to like, I got to find the thing that I'm going to ask about, but I was very much listening as opposed to just kind of letting it wash over me or think about my own thoughts about voting.
And Lisa, how did it feel when she said, "Tell me more about that," and she asked about that specific thing?
You know, it's unusual, right? Like it felt like, oh, the person's actually listening to me. You know, they want to know a bit more about something that I just said or something that I care about. So it felt like I was being heard.
And I want to invite anybody else in the room to make observations. Feel free to put those in the chat. See that if you noticed anything, if you had questions about anything, we'd love to see that you're actively listening to the conversation as well. So what do you think the benefit is to of saying, "Tell me more"? Anybody?
Brianna, go ahead.
Is listening to it as Lisa tells them, you're actually listening to what they're saying, but it keeps the conversation growing and going rather than shutting it down, which I think is such a a quick and easy thing to do in a political situation or an uncomfortable conversation. They get shut down so quickly. We put up a wall, we get defensive, but if you're like, I'm here, I'm curious, just tell me more. That's powerful.
Oh. Thank you, Brianna. Audrey, I see your hand.
Yeah, it also makes the person that you're asking think a little bit more about what they're saying or how they feel or flesh it out, which can be very interesting and very revealing too.
Absolutely. These are things I've noticed when I use that, and people have used it with me. Just like, have I thought this all the way through? You know, do I really know what I think I know, or do I know why I think the way I think? So yeah, I think that is actually, it can be useful. And again, it's in a neutral way. You're not accusing anybody of thinking anything. You're just asking them to tell you more about something. So it lands differently than other kinds of questions. And the other thing that I think is really great is it's super easy to remember. And sometimes in the exercises we do, we use different kinds of words that you couldn't necessarily use in regular conversation because it would be really awkward. But tell me more about that. You can use that and it's not weird, right? So it's an easy little phrase to remember. You'll hear me say it. Once you know that this is a thing that Yes and Nature does, any of us, every time we ask, hey, tell me more about that. We usually get some giggles, but we definitely use it in regular conversation. So that's one of the reasons it's so magical. Just, you can use it just as is. So we're going to do this one more time, and we're going to make it a little bit harder. So we are going to do the same thing where Brooke's going to ask Lisa to ask her why it's important to talk about voting. And this time, Lisa's going to use a little bit of misinformation or even conspiracy theories. And we practice this because these are the kinds of conversations that are going to start to raise up the feelings in you. And then you still have to do the same thing where you are just picking one thread, picking a word, and say, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Right? And not react. You don't want to work on your face, right? Try to respond neutrally and listen, and then pull that thread forward. You have a choice as far as how, you're not driving the conversation by directing the question, but you are choosing what you want them to pull forward. So be thoughtful about that. To think about how, as Brianna said, you want that conversation to continue. So you do have a little bit of agency, but mostly you're trying to make space for Lisa to talk. And yeah, this is harder. So let's try that.
Hey, Lisa. I
Hey.
watched a replay of this webinar a few days after it went live, and it looked awesome, but they kept talking about voting. And I just keep still wondering, like, why do I need to talk about voting?
I don't know, Brooke. I'm not sure that it makes a difference at all. I mean, I think it's really important to take action, but talking about it, people have made up their minds, and so you're not going to change their minds. I think, doing other things is going to be a better way to spend your time.
Tell me more about what you mean when you say we should take action.
Well, I mean, I think, donating to the causes that we care about, right, probably makes a difference. And maybe canvassing or signing up to volunteer, for that kind of stuff. And I mean, I guess that's talking about it, but that's a particularly, directed kind of talking about it. I'm just not sure. Like, I mean, I don't want to get into arguments with my family members, right? Like, there's some people in my family who think differently than I do about the election, and there's things that are so polarized that I guess I'm afraid I would make it worse by talking about it.
Would you be up for telling me more about that with your family?
Sure. I mean, they have some really strong feelings. There's some conspiracy theorists in the family, and they're on the kind of opposite end of the political spectrum, and I just don't really feel like we have much common ground to explore together. So, for them, I kind of avoid it, and just out more broadly in the world, I don't always know where somebody stands, and so I don't want to stir up a hornet's nest.
All right, that was great. Let's get us off spotlight and talk about that a little bit.
Hug Lisa. We're all good.
We can all give Lisa a good time.
All right, spotlights are gone.
All right, so before I ask Brooke and Lisa how that went, did anyone notice anything? I just want to know from the rest of the folks who are watching, did you notice anything about that conversation, how it was different?
Other than being more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, and when you say, now tell me more about like what was demonstrating to you that it was more uncomfortable.
And maybe that's part of the bias that I have, or the kind of reservations that I have, where it felt like you were getting into sensitive territory, right? And I often, I think, get pushed to, far, which could be closing a door instead of opening it in a sort of intense way of trying to find common ground. But it did feel like a little bit of close to home stuff that gets uncomfortable. So it wasn't the politics itself, it was the family connection to me that made it feel like you were starting to come into that space.
So
oh yeah, Cedric. There's a comment in the chat box from Cedric. It matters where the conversation is taking place.
Absolutely.
Right. And as Brooke said earlier, we're not inviting you here to go talk to MAGA folks about why they're talking about the environment, right? There's a lot of people that care about this stuff a lot, and they aren't voting for one reason or another. So those are going to be a better audience generally than someone who is more hostile, right? So you don't necessarily want to talk to your uncle at Thanksgiving about this if it's going to go badly. I mean, you want to be strategic about it. So for Lisa and Brooke, how was that different for you? Brooke, as doing the listening and inquiring in this way, talk about how that was different.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amiel sort of hit it on the head too, where I also felt a little unsure of whether or not it would be okay to ask Lisa to talk more about these things, because they did sort of, not, at first it sort of veered into like, I don't know that I want to hear what she has to say next. And then it went into like, this also feels sensitive, so I don't know if I should be asking her to expand on that. Ultimately, I feel like it opened even wider doors, which was better. But it was, I definitely hesitated before. I maybe would not have asked if I wasn't assigned to ask her to tell me more.
Well, then then I
One
definitely want
thing-
to hear from Lisa about how that landed.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing that Brooke did that I thought was really brilliant, because when it got into that space, like you modified the script a little, right? Like, because you didn't just like tell me more, right? Because you're like, would it be okay for me to ask this? Like, I'm, like that told me a lot, right, about how you were hearing what I was saying and that you were asking permission, right? And so that really made me feel like you were very present with me.
Anything else you want to say, Lisa, about how the experience was like for you?
Well, only that, it's always interesting when you're trying to play a character and figure out the character. I was like, okay, what is the thing for this person, right? So, I was trying to sort of suss that out without becoming, too wildly, it would have been easy to turn it into a caricature, right? So.
Well, I just want to say what I noticed and why I was so excited, because the thread that Brooke, you pulled the first time really shifted Lisa's attitude. Because the first time she answered, she was very negative, but actually, and I don't remember the exact thing that you said, but Lisa's attitude shifted a little bit, where she was moving it toward, well, here's why, but not like I'm against it, right? So that was really interesting for me. Anyone else notice anything before? I feel like we should probably wrap up and get talking about the toolkit, but I feel free to add to the chat and we can comment on it later. But you can see how powerful these little words can be in helping you keep a conversation going, because you, Lisa, if you want to share the slide, just quickly tips to think about this just to wrap it up. One of the most important things is you can't antagonize and influence at the same time. Like, even though it feels like you have to respond in that moment and be correct and win, it's not possible to influence and antagonize at the same time. You're just going to shut the other person down. The second is that you can practice listening with curiosity instead of judgment. And then tell me more is a magic phrase to use to do that. And then remember also, the goal isn't to win a conversation and not necessarily even to convince, at least not right away, but you connect. And if you connect first, you're going to be opening that door of tiny little bit of trust so that you can start to influence and notice those shifts in people's perspectives or attitudes about having the conversations. So thanks so much.
Thank you both. Oh, I really appreciate it. I've been doing some weekend, like live in-person voter outreach at farmers markets. And again, a lot of this is new for me. It's very uncomfortable for me. And I've, been channeling a lot of the yes and like curiosity and openness that Karen, Bobby, who couldn't be here today, and Lisa have taught me and us along the way. I tend to lead in because I'm doing obviously voter outreach, wearing shirts like this with, have you checked your voter registration status? Right? And I try to be very much, it's all about getting everyone prepared to vote. Doesn't matter I don't want to hear who you're voting for. Although avoiding that conversation is sometimes a lot harder than it seems. It's like, earmuffs. I don't want to hear who you're voting for. I don't want to have this conversation. Just want to make sure you're registered. So that is a way to lead in. You can lead in with family that way. I know family sometimes is some of the challenging part. I sent text to my family here saying, do you have your voting plan ready? And everyone in my family responded, what the F is a voting plan? So even though that is some of the nomenclature we're using out there, it's not necessarily very well known in terms of the voting plan. So instead you could say, have you checked your registration status? Do you know where you're voting? Have you have you put it on your schedule to vote? Those are all things that might be clearer to your loved ones than do you have a voting plan? So I'm going to talk for a little bit about what is the Vote for the Planet playbook. And it is available at votefortheplanet.org. That is also where the replay of today will be housed in a few days. So you can go to that website, you can download it. There are also some how-to videos that I've been producing each week, except for this week because we're doing this, that kind of walks through what to do that week in the playbook. Thank you. And Amil has put that in the chat box as well. So this is essentially a social media messaging playbook. So Karen and Lisa have walked us through what it looks like to have these conversations in person. And now I want to think about how can we use our voices a little bit more, or literally like rock our voice online and social media, because that is a place where we can reach a lot of people and have a lot of influence, whether we are doing our professional network or our personal network. And I'm going to, do you mind if I do I'm just going to do a spotlight on myself, if you don't mind. All right, cool. That should make everything a little bit clearer. So the playbook has 3 categories of messages. So 3 sections. One is promote voting for the planet. Another is promote Harris Walls specifically. And you can skip that section if you're like not ready to go there. You can also always swap out those names for any local candidates that you would like to support in addition to Harris Walls or instead of Harris Walls. And a whole section that is about kind of voter readiness. So helping voters get ready for election day, which as a reminder in the US is November 5th. So in case that's not on your calendar, this is a great time to put that on your calendar. In fact, this is a good timeout for all of us here, before we even go out and ask people if they're voter ready, to make sure that we're voter ready. And you can do this by heading to vote.org. It is a great website. You can check your registration status. It takes less than 30 seconds. You can sign up for reminders in case you need them, because, nudge theory suggests that it's helpful to have those. You can find your polling location in case you haven't gotten a little card in your box or maybe something's changed. And some of them actually are really helpful too in terms of sharing where the early voting locations are and what the times are, because that stuff gets all kind of variable and changes sort of space to space. Where I live now, we have a brand new early voting location, so that's all new, and you can find that information on vote.org. I was also recently introduced to voteflare.org. So for those of you, I think this is good for everyone to do, but especially if you're in a swing state or in one of those states where there's some weird, funky stuff going on with elections, you can sign up at voteflare.org and it will alert you if anything has changed in your registration status. Like, whoops, you were suddenly dropped out of, registration. It's going to alert you so you can go fix it before registration deadlines come. And certainly, again, please mark your calendar for what your voting plan, now that you know what that term all encompasses, is going to look like either before November 5th or on November 5th. Okay, back to the playbook. And I mentioned this because there have been people who are actually like ambassadors on the Harris Walls campaign that have realized that their voter registration status was not up to date, and they had to like run around and scurry and doing that. So on page 11, which seems kind of far into the playbook, so if I had to redo it, I'd probably move the content calendar up earlier in the playbook. But if you go down to page 11 of the playbook, there is a content calendar. And this is all just suggestions for what kind of social media posts you could put out each week. And it suggests different themes and different objectives to the week. We are currently like here. So this is week 4. I know my fingers kind of go here. I can do this. There we go. We're in week 4. And if you haven't been using the playbook before you showed up to today, it's okay. You're not behind. You're not late. You can actually, if you want, start with the objectives of week 1 and just make this now your week 1. The content doesn't change dramatically week to week, but it emphasizes different of the categories. So like whether or not we're going to introduce voting for the planet, whether or not we're going to really emphasize getting voter ready, or as we get closer to election day, it does suggest getting a little bit more specific with the candidates you're asking people to vote for. Again, if that's not a comfortable category for you, you can skip that or replace it with local candidates that you really want supported, maybe on some of the down ballot elections. Now, one of the reasons why we have a content calendar is because there are some dates coming up that are important for us to be mindful of when we're asking people to vote or get ready to vote. There are some states actively voting right now, right? A whole bunch of them: Alabama, Illinois, Illinois. That's what, Amiel, you're in Illinois, right? Yep, Amiel's in Illinois. Voting is already happening there. Minnesota, Mississippi, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, you can already vote. So these are places where we might already this week want to get out and be like, hey, make sure you're prioritizing the planet when you go out and vote. There are also voter registration deadlines happening. So having messages out there to make sure you've checked your voter registration status, make sure you're on there and that all your information is correct and you know where you're going, because those deadlines really start to hit. Like October 6th, I think, is one of the first voter registration deadlines. So having messages out this week would be really great. And they run up until, some of them you have same day registration, which is great. But really throughout October, we'll be hitting different registration deadlines. So you'll pick where you are in the week, what kind of topics you want to talk about, and then you can go to that section of the playbook and get actual social media content that you can use as is, right? You have the headline, the body text, the calls to action, the links, the hashtag suggested visuals, playbook. I've also created some visuals that you can use all of this as is. It is open source, open access. You don't have to give tribute to anyone, don't have to put credit, like just take it and use it. And it's, pretty straightforward to use it as is. But I think really with the example of like what Lisa and Karen gave us, if you add some of your own personal story here or share a little bit of your why, which we did before, it's going to make it more powerful. So you can always take what I've done and kind of make it yours. You can use the playbook just as inspiration. So if you don't want to use any of those messages, but you had a thought, like I get more thoughts from the playbooks, like, isn't registration kind of like RSVPing for a party? Okay, well, this is going to be, let's RSVP for the biggest party this year, and that's on November 5th. And maybe these things land, maybe they don't. That's okay. It's all about getting it out there a little bit more. This is a shout out to wales.org. I don't know that they saw the playbook or were influenced by it, so I can't take any credit for that. But they said Wales can't vote. So can you vote for Wales? When you go out and, I'm a sucker for a pun. So something like conscious voting, you had me. And I love seeing organizations being a little bit more willing to go there. So I don't know if any of the folks who are here on this or watching the recording are in charge of your organization's social media platforms. But if you are, I would encourage you to see how you can do a little bit more of this in addition to your personal platforms. Additionally, and there's some ideas for this in the playbook, if you don't have time to create your own posts, you don't want to, you're still not comfortable with it, I totally get that. There's also a lot out there that you can amplify, right? There's Climate Power, NPR just did one about, your checklist for getting ready to vote. Global Citizen, Jane Goodall is now talking about vote for nature. So we're getting more and more people on board. So there's so much content that you can actually just share and amplify. And all of that helps. Like every little bit here helps sprinkle the world with these ideas and thoughts about voting, period, and then voting for the planet, which is even better. I'm sort of jealous that I wasn't able to come up with a line, "You're too hot not to vote." It's been out there a few times. Yeah, I recommend amplifying it because it's awesome. And just lastly, again, in the playbook, if you start doing this, there's a page 14 that's all about managing comments if you start to get any kind of ugly or bad comments. and other ways to get involved if you want to go beyond what we're talking about here. If you want to get into donating, canvassing, writing postcards, there are links there for how to get involved in all of that. So it's a great resource to have for anything moving forward. And if you do any of this, please use the hashtag vote for the planet, so we can maybe do some light tracking to see how this stuff unfolds over the next, what is it, 35 days? It might be 36 days. I'm not sure if my math is exactly right, but we basically have a month to vote for the planet and encourage others to vote for the planet. So I hope you will check out that playbook and reach out at any time if you have questions. Yeah, I Am a Voter is a great resource.
Yes. And I know that because you shared it, and then I just copied it and put it into the chat box. It's a
It's
great
also where
other little thing.
I got the shirt at I Am a Voter website also. So if you want one of these, they sell them in white and black.
I will do that. Shout out to what Brooke was just talking about with her. I recently purchased a couple of vote-oriented T-shirts, and to be honest, that has given people the opportunity to approach me and have a conversation about it. And even though a lot of what we're talking about here is about having a conversation that you're not necessarily comfortable with, or we're talking about addressing challenges in voting, sometimes it's really great to just reinforce with other folks what is really important to you, and then share how important it is for them as well. And that positive reinforcement, even if you're not debating, if you're on the same page, can also be really powerful. And the t-shirt attracts strangers, especially when you have a uterus on it. So Brooke, Karen, Lisa, anything else you wanted to share before we do any final questions and commitments? Are there any questions from the audience? As Brooke mentioned, all of the links should be there. It will be recorded so you can share it with your friends on social. Encourage folks to download the playbook themselves is another great ask, but any questions?
I'll add that, like, in addition to promoting this playbook on my social media channels, I'm also actively implementing the playbook as well. So, you know, if you this is not a plug to like follow me on social media, but if you wanted to just, you know, take it and see what I'm doing and use it, or just kind of have some additional examples to look for, you can do that. I'm basically just on LinkedIn and Instagram at Brooke Tully LLC. But, you know, this is definitely a thing where like every little bit adds up and helps.
Yeah. Lisa.
So I have a question about that, Brooke. Is it cheating? Because like everybody else, I have a lot going on. So what I tend to do is I look for those things that you send out, and then I just share them to my network. That's
great.
an A-okay way to do it, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Because like your network's not my network, and it's the
Right.
message, and it's about the normalization of people seeing this on repeat, because repeat is like really the important part. They see it on repeat. It starts to like get in there. They start to be more comfortable with it, and then also feel more comfortable talking about it and sharing it with others. So if you're just doing a repost or a share, do it. That's awesome.
Yep. So that brings me to, oh, sorry, Karen, go ahead.
I was just going to invite any other questions. And again, you can throw those in the chat because I know we need to wrap up.
Okay.
You're added. You're going to get all my
Awesome.
newsletters from now on. You consented. I get it.
I love it. I love it. So last, and I know we're coming to the end here, really grateful for Brooke and Karen and Lisa to lead these really wonderful discussions about how to make these conversations easier. I would just love if folks wanted to take a minute and think about what's one thing that you're willing to do between now and the election that will ensure that your voice is heard for the planet. I can go first. So I am committed to at least once a week, sharing, or whenever I see some of Brooks, because to Lisa's point, makes it super easy, and to not be afraid of having a conversation about this issue wherever I happen to be. If folks want to share any of their own personal commitments, you can do so in the chat box. I'm sure folks would love to. Yes, Brianna's canvassing this weekend at the farmers market. Awesome. Ani's going to share Brooke's fabulous post too. Yay. Thank you, Ani. Dr. Ani Byers is from the state that gave us Tim Walls. So we have to thank that Minnesota for lending us their amazing governor. Thank you, Ani. Any other commitments that folks want to share? Karen's going to get a new t-shirt. Excellent. Sarah's going to share voter registration and amplify on social media. I love that. Any other commitments? Any
Everyone
other
commits to
commitments?
voting.
Yes, at the very least. Oh yeah. Tammy, this t-shirt I found, there's ones that say vote like Ruth sent you, vote like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I bet if you do a Google search for vote like Ruth sent you, you'll see this and other ones just like it with and without the Ruth part. Sometimes people don't get the Ruth part if they're not old enough. Yes, Terry, reinvigorating social media. You're welcome, Tammy. Anybody else?
Teresa put in here too, getting a plan in place to canvass in a nearby swing state.
Ooh,
Which is awesome. I
awesome.
appreciate that. I've heard other folks doing that too. Like they're going to Pennsylvania to canvass or something, like their state's going whichever way it's going to go and they head to another state. And that's amazing. To me, that's above and beyond. And I love it.
There's
That's
also lots of
awesome.
postcard campaigns that you can join.
Yes.
There's
Yes,
a place I
Tammy.
think called Vote Forward that lets you do letter writing.
Awesome. Anybody have links to the postcard campaign?
I think Karen's going to put one in.
Karen. Okay, awesome. Karen, thank you. Anything else anybody wants to share? Thank you, Karen. I am going to copy and bookmark that myself.
Yeah, very cool.
And, if folks on the phone have other ideas and resources to share, please do feel free. As Brooke said, this is all open. We're just passionate about it. We want to ensure that we are able to get our voices heard for the planet.
Let's go planet Earth.
Let's go.
There's no planet
Earth.
B.
There is no planet B.
So everyone here and everyone that registered will be sending out the recording link to this so you can share it with others as well, especially if there's someone who couldn't join us today. We'll include some of these links of resources and links of ways to maybe learn a little bit more about some of the presenters that we had today. We're just so appreciative that you took the time, whether it's your afternoon or your evening or your super late evening, to be with us. Again, I think for all of us, we talk at very long lengths about conservation and sustainability and protecting the planet and climate change. And we can do that all day. And for, all four of us that were presenting today, I think these are newer conversations for us. And it's sort of an exercise in how do we flex our conservation muscles and our climate muscles for voting, because there are so many intersections there. So thank you for being on this journey with us of exploring these intersections and, using our transferable skills in different ways. And again, all of our inboxes are open. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And don't forget to register to vote, check your status, and ask all your friends and family if they've checked their registration status recently. Well, thank you so much, y'all, for being here. We really appreciate it. Woo! What to you? We can do it.
We got this.
Yes, we can.
Yes,
gonna
we
steal that.
can.
I like that. Yes. All right. Have a good rest of your night, everyone.